I think the most common misconception is that the CHIPS Act is all about the current supply chain crisis we're living through. In fact, it's not, and we've had a problem with semiconductor competitiveness for a very long time. In North America has been there for a very long time. It precedes the most recent supply chain problems. The key problem that everybody's trying to solve is that at some point, most of the semiconductor manufacturing was done in North America. In fact, the United States was one of the dominant countries in both research, development, and manufacturing of semiconductors. But that was many years ago, and over the last couple of decades, more and more semiconductor manufacturing has been both commoditized, but also aggregated into a very small number of companies that primarily operate outside of the United States. So if you look at how much production is still done in the United States, about 12% is built in the United States, but a lot of it is built outside of the United States. And not necessarily in China. It's built in Taiwan and Korea. But suffice to say, it certainly represents a national security problem. And if we were to want to make sure that we have supply that's allocated to the United States and have full control over it, that would be difficult to get done because we only control 12% of the semiconductor supply chain. And it's not all semiconductors. In fact, some of the most advanced semiconductors are now built outside of American borders. So the investment has been overwhelmingly going abroad, and that's what everybody's trying to solve. There is something called Division A in it, which is the CHIPS Act itself. There's additional money allocated for other things, right? We're also funding the National Science Foundation and the NIST Institute. There's a lot of research and development programs funded for semiconductors, but the CHIPS Act itself is focused on manufacturing, right? So it's about a $52 billion package to incentivize domestic manufacturing. That sounds like a big number. It's actually not. In fact, if you look at how much money China has put into incentivizing their domestic semiconductor manufacturing, it's about $50 billion. And these are incentives. You actually can't necessarily reshore all of the semiconductor manufacturing, even with this big bill. What you can do is incentivize companies to operate these fabs on American shores where normally labor prices are high. And in some cases, there's really no expertise here that we will need to go develop and import. So it creates an incentive for companies to build in the United States, which is what's needed to rebalance that picture. I don't expect that 100% of all semiconductor manufacturing will be done in the United States in the future. It will be more than 12%, which is the main objective. Well, if you look at printed circuit boards, right? The printed circuit boards are the flat pieces on which we place actual chips and then where we embed electronics, right? These are the things that actually connect the chips together and connect other passive and active components together. So where are the PCBs themselves built? They're actually built primarily in Asia. You can't find them in other low-cost manufacturing regions. So this isn't just a United States problem. If you're buying printed circuit boards, chances are you're buying them from either China or Taiwan. Those are the dominant two countries for printed circuit board manufacturing. There are some PCBs built in the United States, but these are overwhelmingly fairly old plants. And as far as I know, the PCB fabs in US, we used to have 300 of them. Now we're down to 100. There have been no new ones built in the last 10 years, as far as I know. In fact, we need to invest into domestic PCB manufacturing if we were to ever to get into a supply chain crunch. There's a bill on a Congress floor now to allocate additional $3 billion. That's in addition to the CHIPS Act, which is the $52 billion appropriation, which will incentivize domestic manufacturing of PCBs. That bill is not passed. So that is now in some form of debate, and I hope that it does, because it's yet another area where we could find ourselves in trouble and wake up one day and say, I didn't realize PCBs weren't made here. People know, and it's one of those things that we have awareness about. It hasn't hurt us yet. So we could find ourselves looking at 5% PCB domestic production going to 3, going to 2, and even a 5% is not enough. We need a 20% mark. We would be in a much better place, and I think everybody would feel more comfortable that we can fulfill all of our PCB demands if we were to say, look, we're going to get into a wartime economy and we need to make sure that all PCBs are made in the United States. In the last couple of years, we finally started to see more and more reshoring, and that's broadly, not just electronics. That means we are literally creating more manufacturing jobs and meaningfully more than ever before. So in electronics specifically, we are absolutely seeing not just people talking about reshoring and nearshoring, but very much an understanding in the supply chain world that they have to start thinking about resilience, and they have to start thinking about what happens if the country in which they manufacture is not accessible for whatever reason. And I think the reasons for that are multifold. We initially started to see people get concerned about it because of COVID and tariffs. That really wasn't enough to start the reshoring wave. When it really started moving were the ocean freight bottlenecks, right? When the transit time from China went from 4 to 5 weeks to 25 weeks. In terms of pricing of what it costs to move things out of China, when we went 10x and then 20x on that price, all of a sudden the supply chain world tipped over and started to realize that it's not just the shutdowns, it's not just the tariffs, it's not just the slowdowns in ocean shipping, it's all of these things. And the final straw, I think, has been instability in Europe. In fact, what most people don't realize is that North America is one of the largest manufacturing hubs. If you look at electronics, there's actually a lot of electronics specifically already built in North America. What we're now seeing is that the growth in North America for electronics is starting to accelerate. So by the numbers, we're talking about just assembly numbers. It's about a $500 billion market worldwide for all electronics assembly. About $560 billion. North America is about 1/5 of that. It's about $104 billion and growing faster now than it was 2 years ago. So we're absolutely seeing a pretty major shift in terms of how supply chains operate. It's also building closest to their customers and really not forcing your products post-assembly to spend a lot of their time on ocean routes and really consuming a lot of carbon unnecessarily.